Hello and welcome to this short video tutorial on layout containers. I think layout containers are one of the most important parts of the dashboarding experience. But sometimes they behave slightly odd, so I thought I'd try and demystify their behavior by showing you rather than just writing about it. So we've got three sheets. I've created these already. If you're familiar with the Information Lab Speed Challenge, you'll be very familiar with those sheets. But I thought I'd start by asking you, the viewer, if I drag a sheet onto this dashboard, what happens? Actually, at the moment, it's not a blank dashboard. I'll completely clear it. So there we go, we've got a clear dashboard. If I drag a sheet onto this dashboard, what happens? And I think most of you would say that Tableau drags a sheet and it places it on the dashboard, and on the right-hand side, it creates a legend and any associated items, so parameters and filters would also go here, and that makes a lot of sense. But I'd actually challenge that perspective a little bit more and say, well, that's not actually what's going on. What's going on is happening over here. You've got a very detailed breakdown of what's actually happening on the dashboard. You've got your two legend items. They're inside a vertical container. You can see that as I highlight them here. Then you've got your sheet. The sheet is tiled next to that vertical container. So you can see there, then they're side by side. And I'll just collapse this to keep things clear. And then those two sorts of sections, the tiled section and the vertical section, are inside a horizontal container. And the horizontal container is itself tiled on the main dashboard. And that just basically means, well, if you've only got one tile, then you're pretty much taking up the whole view. It's pretty straightforward. So in order to understand layout containers, I think you're actually better off not using any sheets and starting with blank layout containers, so you can truly understand what's going on. So I've just cleared those sheets from the dashboard, and we're back to having a plain dashboard. And instead I'm going to drag a horizontal container in. And when I do that, you notice immediately that Tableau creates a tiled section, and then it puts the horizontal container. And that's, I guess, the first thing to be aware of. Everything that you drag onto the dashboard from the very moment you start is essentially being tiled. And that's because we've selected the tiling option here. If I was to select floating and then drag a horizontal section on there, you'd see this sits above the tile section. It's floating. It doesn't have any sort of belonging anywhere. You can move it around. It's not part of any structure. And that's a really important thing to notice. And if you change that from a floating to a tiled section, well, guess what? Tableau puts it where it thinks it makes the most sense. So if I deselect that and I select the parent horizontal layout container and we go to format that, let's see if we can make it a different color. You can just see here on the edge, the red layout container is inside the yellow one. So that's sort of one of the first things to understand, the difference between tiled and floating layout containers. The next thing to understand is the hints that Tableau gives you when you drag an item onto the dashboard. So if I drag a horizontal container onto an empty dashboard, and hopefully make sure the tiled section is triggered, when I put it anywhere in the middle, it highlights the whole dashboard grey. And that's telling me that it's just going to put it there in one tile on the dashboard. And because there's nothing else on the dashboard, if I go to the edges, nothing happens, because it's the first item on the dashboard. So let's put that in there, and let's color that yellow. And if we take another horizontal container, notice how now the hints are different. So when I highlight the layout container that I've already got on the dashboard, it tells me that you can put something inside of this layout container, because you can see here that the yellow box now has a blue outline all the way around. And that's Tableau's hint to you that whatever you're dragging on, whatever part of the dashboard that you're about to bring on, is going to be inside this layout container. And this layout container is a horizontal one. If, however, I go to the edge you can see it's a very thin edge, then it's essentially going to tile it in the same position. If I bring it to the bottom, it will tile it in that bottom half. If I bring it to the left, it will tile it in the left half. If I bring it to the top, it will tile it in the top. But the minute I move off the edge, it instantly goes to highlighting the whole thing, because again, I've got really no other option. So I'm going to put that here just below. Oh, I missed that. Let's try again. Perfect. And let's make this a green section. It's perfect. We have a green section. Now let's bring in 2 verticals. And now when we bring in a vertical, you get the same options as you did before. So I can put it inside this yellow horizontal container or the green horizontal container. But now when I go to the edge, I'm faced with 2 new options. I get this option to tile it with the existing horizontal section at the top, to tile it with the existing horizontal section in the bottom right, or to tile it with both layout containers. So now if I put that here, it tiles it adjacent to those 2 sections. That's not actually where I want to put that. I actually want to put it right here in the top right. So I'm going to go back as I just did, and I'm going to drag the vertical container. And when I get to nearly the edge but not quite, you can see it just changes. And then when I go to the edge again, it changes again. Very small movements. So if I just drop that there, and I make that blue, we now have a blue vertical layout container next to the yellow layout container. And we're going to do that again. We're going to make a red one here on the bottom right. Did exactly the same thing. I'm going to make that red. So now we have 4 amazing pastel layout containers, 2 horizontal and 2 vertical. Awesome. Okay, so now this is probably a good opportunity to explain some of the sort of dashboarding options you've got here. You've got a whole range of size options. I don't think enough people really play around with these sizes. Recently I've been designing some dashboards for print, and it's actually been really useful to have the A3 or A4 sort of perspective there. So be sure to play around with those sizes. It's, you know, Tableau dashboards just don't live on the screen. They live well beyond that. And so I'm going to go to an automatic view, and I'm just going to close that, and then I'm going to drag Tableau here, and you see that this is a very fluid design. When we make the height minimal, it splits everything equally in terms of a vertical height, and if we make it really wide, it splits everything really nicely vertically. So, you know, Tableau does have the ability to be fluid. And you're probably thinking, yes, well, how do I do this in the dashboard? We'll cover that in the next video. But at the moment, I just want to cover the basics. Now, one of the things I often see from, I guess, new users is they start dragging a lot of things onto the dashboard, and it gets pretty hectic in terms of layout containers and what's going on, and they're not really paying attention to this area. And I'll show you one really, really good example of that. So if I drag a text container here onto the the horizontal layout container, and I say first line of text, I click OK. You can see, there you go, my first line of text has been placed inside the horizontal container. Now, if I drag another text box and I go to put it there, now notice where that is. I'm not tiling it. It's actually saying put it inside the layout container, but it's also highlighting the bottom gray section. So you would think that when I drop that in there, you get 2 horizontal containers. But actually, no, that's not what happened. What happened is Tableau decided that when you placed that second line of text below the first line of text, you are actually vertically stacking the options. Whereas before this was a horizontal container, it's now changed into a vertical container, and it's adopted the behavior of a vertical container. So if we go back one, you'll notice that was a horizontal container, and now it's a vertical container. So that's one of the things to watch out for. Sometimes when you're dragging elements and you put things where it would suggest that you actually want different behavior, Tableau will make a change based on that assumption. And just to prove that that's the case, I'm going to drag a new text item here. Call that first line of text. Click OK. And drag a second line of text there. And there you go. Exactly the same behavior, and those are both vertical. You can see that there. I'm selecting them here in the layout view. So it's really, really important to pay attention to what's going on here. And this can happen the other way around. So you can do it to a vertical container, to a horizontal container, but it's actually slightly more difficult to do the same thing with a vertical container, to make a vertical container stack horizontally. And I find that the only way really to do this is if you happen to use a blank layout container in the layout. So if I drag a blank layout container here onto this vertical container here, you'll notice, okay, that's still vertical. And you've got the blank section inside of that. You can see that. But now if I drag a text item and I put it on either side, and I click, and I'm going to say this used to be a vertical container. Click OK. You'll notice that vertical container now became a horizontal container. And let's just go back one step to prove that. Vertical, it's now horizontal. So when users are dragging around lots of items, maybe you've got a dashboard with 6 or 7 sheets, you maybe got some floating items, you've got a parameter that you want to sort of wedge in a specific area. It's really important to pay attention to the hints that Tableau is giving you. It's pretty much telling you what's about to happen before it happens. So if you pay attention to those, you're less likely to get lost on the dashboard. And so that's it. That's sort of the first video showing you the basics around layout containers.
Okay, so in the last video, I showed you the basics for layout containers. I showed you how sometimes the layout containers can change purpose from a horizontal to vertical and vice versa. And then I used color to basically help show you that. We're going to be doing that a little bit more. In today's video, I want to focus on something a little bit more challenging, where we essentially use everything that we've learned to create something a little bit more dynamic and interesting. This is a home page system. The idea is that it links to different sheets or different dashboards, and you'd click on an icon and it would take you there. Now those sheets or dashboards aren't actually here yet, so clicking on anything won't do anything. But the thing we want to focus on is the structure. And so I've actually created a colored example here just to try and make things a little bit simpler. So you can see here that we've got a whole range of colors going on, and each one pertains to a layer on the dashboard. And if we look at this structure here, you'll notice that you can actually sort of just about make out that hierarchy here. And if you sort of organize your layout containers, then this is actually quite a useful guide of seeing what's where. So we start off with a tiled section, yes, and then a horizontal section across the whole sheet. In that we have a vertical section which can pretty much contains everything on this sheet. Next to that is a blank section and another blank section. If we expand that again, inside of that we have a horizontal section at the top with a text sort of title inside of it. You have another bit of text below it. As I'm clicking these, you can see that it's highlighting the appropriate section here. And then if we highlight that vertical section there, then you'll see, okay, this vertical section contains more items. So let's go into that. And if we minimize these sections, you start to get the trend here. We're basically stacking containers inside of each other to achieve an overall effect. And the overall effect is that when we look at this dashboard and we start resizing it, it's fairly responsive. If I If I do this and start moving things around, you'll see it's not as fast, but it responds. And the icons, because these are shapes in a sheet and they're set to fill the entire view, when the space gets small, then they get smaller. So you get a sort of fake responsive sort of feel to the dashboard, where it adjusts to fit whatever height it's given in, it's sort of put in, which is, I think, quite nice. And similarly with width, these lines can show you here that, you know, if you had an image here on the right hand side rather than a blank space, then you'd essentially get sort of an expanding and diminishing image. And so if we go back to the sheet here and we get the dashboard hierarchy out, you start to see, basically, if you put together all the tips and tricks that we've learned so far on layout containers, you can start to build some quite compelling user interfaces that you can use. And so I'm just going to walk you through how I built this, and whilst I'm doing that, you'll see a few tips and tricks that I use to make this fast and simple. So I'm going to minimize that, and we're going to go back to this sheet. I'm going to create a new dashboard. For now, we're not going to use any of the sheets that we've built so far. We're just going to use this sort of area here on the left. Let me just give myself a little bit more space. So to start with, I'm going to make this automatic. I'm going to make it fill the whole screen, just so you can see what I'm doing. Next up, first thing I'm going to drag on is a horizontal container. And let's color that so that you can see that it's actually on there. Sometimes it's difficult to know what's going on. Some thin colors just help make it a little bit more obvious. So the first thing we've got here is a horizontal container. And inside of that horizontal container, I'm actually going to put a blank area. And that's going to be sort of in on the right hand side. And if you don't believe me, it is in there, but because it's the only thing, it's taking up the whole screen. And then the next thing I'm going to put inside of that is I think I'm going to put a vertical area here on the left hand side. So we've got a vertical and a blank space here. Now the vertical container is actually taking up pretty much all the space, because by default blank containers don't have a set width. They're sort of flexible. And the vertical containers or layout containers automatically adapt. Again, they've got no set width, so what's happening is that vertical container is taking sort of precedence over this blank area. There's nothing in it, so it becomes the smallest thing on the dashboard. If you were to set a fixed width of that, then obviously it would then abide by that space, but because there isn't anything sort of happening there. Next thing I'm going to drag in is a horizontal container. And again, it looks like I'm just dragging into empty space, but it is actually in there. So just dragged in that horizontal space into the vertical container. And then the first thing is going to be a text space. So let's call this Superstore Sales Menu System. Excuse my spelling. Here we go. And let's make this nice and large. Make it 20, and yeah, so there we go. So now if we highlight that, you'll see that there's a horizontal space in there, and inside of that is a text item. That's perfect. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag another text item, and this is just going to be called description text. So this bit of text describes something. I'm just going to say okay. So we've got this area here at the top, and I'm going to color that layout container again, just so you can see what's going on. I'm going to make it green, and then you've got the text just below that. And then the next thing, now that we've got that layout container in there, is I'm actually going to drag in a blank space. And I do this just to make my life a little bit easier, because sometimes you need something in the container to be able to drop something else in, and you'll see exactly what I mean a little bit later. So I'm going to now drag in the vertical right in between there, and you'll see that that's now taken up all the space again. It's gone and taken the full width, and I can now select this blank space and delete it. So we've got a vertical container, we've got text just above describing what this is, and this is our title. And if we compare that to what we have so far, you see it's very similar. We've got our Superstore sales item there, hover or click on the icons to navigate, which is our description text, And now we're getting into the bulk of sort of the meat of this area here. Now I'm going to use images rather than sheets for now, just to basically show an example of how to do this quickly. But you can use sheets instead of images where I use the icon. So we've got a vertical container in here, and again I'm going to use a blank container. I'm going to put those inside to help me do something a little later on, and you'll see why that is in a second. So I have put in a blank area, it's gone inside of this vertical, and I'm putting another blank area in there. And a lot of this is actually just sort of blind faith. It is there. If you select them, you can see that they're there, but I think as a user sometimes you can think, well, what's going on here? Nothing happened. But you pay attention to this layout view here, because that's where the magic is really happening. And so vertical container automatically resizes anything inside of it equally if they have no set height or width. And that's exactly what's going on here. It's sized two blank areas the same height. And the width is now abiding by this sort of split that we've got here. You might notice that this has been changing back and forth as we put things in there. That's being controlled by the containers that we put inside and the text items that we put inside. And now the next thing I'm going to do is drag in 5 vertical containers. And these are going in. Again, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And we need 5. So just do one more. There we go. Just to prove that they're going in, I'm going to format those and color them alternating colors just so you can see what's going on. There we go. Now, I hope you can now appreciate why I use coloring a lot, because imagine if I hadn't colored anything, this would all just be white, and I wouldn't know what the hell's going on if I was honest. So I'm now going to delete the 2 blank spaces I put in there, and if we select this layout container, and I'm just going to format that, and I'm going to color it red, you'll see that in our layout container here, in our vertical layout container, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertical containers, and they're equally spaced out, and you can see that here in the hierarchy. So we've got a horizontal section, our text section just below that, and our vertical section containing 5 more vertical containers. Excellent. Next step is putting these icons and text in there. Icons in my case would be sheets, but I'm just going to use images to keep this video nice and short. So how are we going to put these in there, and how are we going to get them to space nicely? Well, we're going to need a horizontal container. So again, a bit more blind faith here. We're going to put a horizontal container in there and in there. And I know it's doing this because when I hover over the vertical area, the blue line is going around the container to tell me, yes, this is about to get dropped inside of here. And that's what happens. If I put it somewhere else like there, that would tell me that it's about to put a horizontal container in between the 2 verticals. We don't want that. So I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing. Okay, and you'll see I now have something inside all my vertical containers, and if I select that, you can see that switching there between those 2 there. Okay, so now that we've done that, again a bit more blind faith here. If this had no color, you wouldn't be seeing anything. It'd just all still be white. We haven't got a single sheet on here. But what I'm doing is really important. I'm building the structure for my semi-responsive menu system here. So next thing, now that I've got something horizontal in each of the vertical containers, I'm going to put some text in there. And I'm going to call this menu option 1. I'm just going to make this nice and big. And I'm actually going to copy that. I'm a bit lazy today, so I'm just going to copy that in there. And when you do that, you realize a vertical container suddenly shrinks. And in a way that makes sense, because what it's saying is, well, this vertical container doesn't need more space than that height. So let me minimize that and make all the others the same. And if I drag a text item into that one, click OK, you'll see it does the same again. And if I drag another text item into this container here, it does the same again, and again, and do the last one, something very different happens. So it said, okay, those are your containers. Let's just have a look and make sure everything went in okay. It's always good just to look back here in your layout view and make sure everything went where you wanted it to go. And that appears to be the case. That's perfect. Yeah, everything went where I wanted it to go. Now the next thing I need to do is to drag in a blank item on the left hand side of each one of these. And that's just going to give me a bit more space to work with. Let's just do that now. We're going to delete these later on, but again they just make it much easier for me to manipulate. And then in between these I'm going to use images. This is an icon set that I really like. I use it a lot in Tableau, and it's just got some great icons. So let's just use some random images. Here we go. And when we pick an image in, Tableau realizes, hold on a minute, this image is huge, let's give it more space. And that's exactly what it does. But let's do that to all of them first, and you can see what decision Tableau is making here. So let's choose another icon so you can see what that looks like. And then we're quickly running out of space here, but let's keep going. Let's see what happens as we add more. Now can you start seeing it's actually now equally distributing them? It ran out of space at the bottom, so now it's starting to equally distribute the ones at the top. And when we add in an image at the bottom, same thing happens again. And this is a final one. I'll use a paper airplane. Perfect. So we've got our 5 images nicely spread out here, and we're going to get rid of the blank spaces we put on the left hand side. And voila, we have our menu options. Next thing to do is to just center the image and fit them. Again, if these were sheets, you'd probably not be doing this. You'd probably set them to fill the entire view. But at the moment they're resizing because there is something else that is taking up more space. So do you see how when I finally told this one to fit the image, it decided, okay, I'll do that properly now, and it equally distributed everything across the page. And there you go, there's your paper aeroplanes. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the width. I'm going to give all these the same width. I'm going to give them a width of 150. I'm going to copy that because again I'm pretty lazy. Keep going. Where is it? There we go. Okay. And of course they're not all menu option 1, they're different menus. Double click that. And this is the 5th one. Perfect. And so now I'm going to try and remove all the coloring, so you can see that we have really ended up pretty much close to where we started at the beginning, minus a few sort of finishing touches that you can do yourself. So I've taken off the background wallpaper, color on that layout container. I'm just going to select the layout containers here. I'm going to format container, there's nothing there. I'm going to select the layout container here again. There's select the layout container again. There's none there. Perfect. I'm going to select the layout container for the whole thing. And hopefully you're noticing my workflow. I use different methods every single time to get to layout containers. I don't ever use the same one every single time. So here, I'm being slightly slow here. And sometimes when you select the text item and not the layout container. And obviously because we've got the vertical and the horizontal in there, I have to do that twice to get to what I want. and so maybe I'm just going to put in a small blank space in between these. I'm going to reduce that a bit. Use Tableau's automatic snapping sort of feature here. It doesn't come up. And there we go. That's a very, very quick overview of how to create something responsive, and I hope you agree. There you go. As if I start resizing this, you'll see that everything sort of resizes. Now, if you were using sheets, the idea is that you wouldn't use these blank lines, you'd use something a bit more accurate. So I'd actually use an image in between all of these so that you get the same consistency in each horizontal section. Secondly, I'd use sheets because they give you more control of these icons, and then you can also apply actions on them. You can't apply actions on images. Lastly, if we have a look back at this one, the finished sort of example, just some polishing touches on the font and some information here at the bottom that you can use. But there you go, that's how to build a responsive sort of menu system. In the next video we'll go through tying all of this together, so we'll actually create a Superstore sales dashboard which will have this menu system, and it will have a couple of other dashboards as well that we'll interact with, and we'll cover a few new ideas there.